You were maybe 8 years old, standing at the top of the stairs in the dark, and you heard the letterbox go, the envelopes hitting the mat. Then someone downstairs picked them up and stopped. And you heard the exact sound a person makes when they see a number. You did not go down. You stood there in your socks on the top step and learned something nobody taught you on purpose, that there is a number somewhere in this house that decides what kind of night this is going to be. Hold on to that. We come back to it at the end. 25 years later, you are still trying to get that number to move. You have a practice now, a vision board, a figure on a card in your wallet, 15 minutes every morning of feeling as though it has already happened. And here is the part you have not said out loud. It is not that none of it worked. The number moved, and on the nights it moved, you felt almost nothing. So let me give you the whole thing in one breath, and then spend the rest of it turning something you can agree with into something you can feel. You are not failing to manifest wealth. You are manifesting with terrible precision, and what you are precisely manifesting is more of the measuring instrument. You have spent years trying to make gold, and there were always two kinds. Two men will help me, Alan Watts, who wrote an essay explaining that money is not wealth, and watched everybody miss the part that mattered, and Carl Jung, who spent 30 years reading alchemists and worked out what they were really doing down in the cellars. Go back to the stairs. A child does not learn that money is useful. A useful thing is a hammer, and nobody stands frozen in the dark, listening to how their mother says the word hammer. What that child learns is that money is weather, that it arrives from outside the house without warning and sets the temperature of the people he loves, whether the kitchen is quiet in the good way or the other way. That is not a financial education. That is a nervous system filing money under survival. And survival does not do nuance. It never learns the difference between having enough and being safe. Because at 8 years old, on that step, they really were the same thing. Then a second layer goes on top, and this one you were handed. Watts said the great obstacle to a future of wealth for everybody was not economics, it was the Protestant ethic. And here is how he described it. The devil, it is said, finds work for idle hands to do, and human energy cannot be trusted unless most of it is absorbed in hard, productive work, so that on coming home we are too tired to get into mischief. Too tired to get into mischief, that is not an observation. That is a design specification, a machine built to make sure you never have enough life left at the end of a day to want anything with your whole chest. So when you sit down to manifest abundance, look at who is in the room with you. A child who believes a number decides whether he is loved, and a culture that spent 300 years making sure he cannot enjoy one thing he has not visibly suffered for. You are asking that arrangement for permission to be rich. You are asking a lock to be a key. In 1968, Watts published an essay called Wealth versus Money, and the entire argument is one sentence. Money is a way of measuring wealth, but is not wealth in itself. He's not being poetic. Money is the same category of object as a centimetre, as an hour, as a line of longitude. It measures something, it is not the something. Then he tells a story about the Great Depression. In the 30s, the physical resources of the country, the brain, the brawn, and the raw materials, were in no way depleted. The steel was still in the ground. The men who knew how to build were still alive. What vanished was the measurement. So Watts says it was just as if someone had turned up to work on building a house, and on the morning of the Depression the boss had said, "Sorry, baby, but we can't build today. No inches." No inches. What do you mean, no inches? We've got wood, we've got metal, we've even got tape measures. Yeah, but you don't understand business. We've been using too many inches and there's just no more to go around. That is funny for about 4 seconds, and then it stops, because it is what you do to yourself every day. You have the wood, you have the metal, you have a working body, a couple of decades, and about 11 things you are quietly good at that you have never put in a row. And you have decided you cannot build because you are short of inches. Watts puts it another way as well. A chest of gold coins, he says, is of no use whatsoever to a wrecked sailor alone on a raft. What that man needs is real wealth. A fishing rod, a compass, an outboard motor with gas in it. Elsewhere, he describes people so hypnotized by symbols that they would, if they could, save time by eating the menu instead of the dinner. And then he says this: another way of eating the menu is preferring money to wealth. Now look at your practice, 15 minutes every morning, eyes closed, carefully generating the feeling of a number. You are not manifesting a life. You are sitting in a restaurant with your eyes shut, chewing the menu, and wondering why you are still hungry. Which brings me down to the cellars. For 1600 years, serious and educated people spent their lives trying to turn base metal into gold. We remember it as the great embarrassment of the human intellect. Jung read them, thousands of pages in Latin, for 30 years, and he noticed the serious ones kept saying the same strange thing over and over in a distinctly irritated tone. Our gold is not the common gold. They were not gentle about it. Jung records that they condemned the naive gold makers as liars, frauds, and dupes. He says you can spot a worthless manuscript instantly. And here is his description of documents written in the 14th century. You know them by their endless recipes, their studied mystification, their excruciating dullness, and their shameless insistence on the making of gold. Endless recipes, studied mystification, shameless insistence on the making of gold. Jung wrote that about medieval manuscripts. It is also, almost word for word, what you will find if you search the word manifestation this afternoon. So what were the real ones doing? Jung's answer is the hinge of this whole video. The alchemist, he writes, projected the unconscious into the darkness of matter in order to illuminate it. And then the sentence itself. He experienced his projection as a property of matter, but what he was in reality experiencing was his own unconscious. He was bent over a sealed glass vessel, watching something blacken and slowly turn, and he believed he was doing chemistry. He was watching himself. The furnace, the stages, the marriage of the sun and the moon. One man's own becoming reflected back off a wall of glass in a century with no word for the unconscious. Now put the two men in the same room, because they are making one claim at two scales. Watts describes the error. You have confused the measure with the thing it measures, money with wealth, the menu with the dinner. Jung describes the engine that produces it. When something inside you has no name and no route up into consciousness, it does not wait quietly. It lands on the nearest available object, and from then on you experience it as a property of that object. So the alchemist put his soul into a lump of lead and called it chemistry. And you have put your soul into a 5-figure number and called it finance. You will chase it with everything you have, and you will probably get it, and it will not do the thing. Because it was never in there, you put it there. Which is why the practice fails. Not because you did it badly. There are 5 ways, and the 5th holds all the others in place. 1. You threw away the base material. Every alchemical text begins with the prima materia, the base matter, the stuff you start from. Jung's description It is cheap as dirt and can be had everywhere, only nobody knows it. And, he adds, the worst thing is that without it the work cannot even be begun. Thrown out into the street, cast on the dunghill, the most despised and rejected thing there is. Now, what is the opening move of every manifestation practice you have ever tried? Not this flat, not this job, not this body, not this Tuesday. You declare your circumstances to be the problem, and then you attempt the work. You are trying to begin the opus by throwing out the only material it could be made from. Of course, nothing happens. There is nothing in the vessel. 2. You went looking outside. There is a line Jung quotes that is 400 years old and lands like it was written this morning. The water of life is easily had. Everybody possesses it, though without knowing its value, it is despised by the stupid. And then the reason nobody takes it, because they assume that every good thing is always outside and somewhere else, and that the source in their own souls is a nothing but. A nothing but. That is the exact tone, is it not? Yes, but that's just me. Yes, but that's nothing. Yes, but anyone could do that. And every one of those sentences is a door being closed from the inside. 3. You asked for a number instead of a life. Watts did vocational guidance with students, and he had one question: what would you like to do if money were no object? Almost nobody can answer it, and the reason is not modesty. The question is difficult and a number is easy. A number costs nothing to want. You can want a figure for 11 years and never once find out what you are actually like. Watts was blunt about the price. If you say that getting the money is the most important thing, he said, you will spend your life completely wasting your time. You'll be doing things you don't like doing in order to go on living. That is, in order to go on doing things you don't like doing. Not knowing what you would do is not a gap in the plan. It is the poverty. Everything after it is arithmetic. 4. Even when it arrives, you cannot digest it. Watts said, half joking, that preachers of the late 20th century would have to start insisting that enjoyment of total luxury is a sacred and solemn duty. He was joking about the sermon. He was not joking about the need for one. Because you know this from the inside. The rays landed, and within 9 weeks the floor had come up underneath you, and you were standing at precisely the same height, looking up at precisely the same distance. There is no sum of money that can be received by a person who has never been given permission to have it. It converts, on the way in, into the same feeling at a higher denomination. 5. The lack is load-bearing. Look at what the shortfall is currently holding. The thing you have not made, the call you have not made, the city you did not move to, the version of you that has never been tried and therefore has never once failed. Every one of those is filed, and they are all in the same drawer, under the same heading. When I have the money. That drawer is doing enormous structural work. It is not a list of plans. It is an alibi with a reference number. Because if the money arrived tomorrow, the drawer would dissolve, and every item in it would be handed back to you with your own name on it and no explanation attached. So some part of you very sensibly keeps you just short, always just short, close enough to be maddening, far enough to be a reason. It is not laziness, it is not a poor mindset, it is load-bearing. You are not afraid of being poor. You are afraid of running out of reasons. So what has to happen? What has to die here is not the desire for wealth. Watts was no ascetic, neither was Jung, and neither, for what it is worth, am I. What has to die is the measurement. The alchemists had a name for that stage, the nigredo, the blackening. It comes first, before anything gold happens at all, and what blackens is the material you brought with you. In practice, the number stops working, not because you reached it, because one ordinary afternoon you look straight at it and cannot feel anything coming off it, and you realize you have been carrying a figure around for years the way a man carries a photograph of somebody he has never met. You will grieve it, not because wanting it was wrong, but because it was standing in for something, and the moment it stops standing in, you have to go and meet the actual thing. And the actual thing has no figure attached to it, and it cannot be reached by Friday. So what does the work actually look like? And here I have to be careful with you, because this is exactly the point where every other video starts lying. The alchemists describe the opus as passing through a sequence of colours. Jung reports it like this: 4 stages, characterized by the original colours mentioned in Heraclitus: melanosis, the blackening; leucosis, the whitening; xanthosis, the yellowing; and iosis, the reddening. But read the sentence he puts immediately before that one, because nobody ever quotes this part. Hardly 2 authors, he says, are of the same opinion regarding the exact course of the process and the sequence of its stages. So this is not a ladder. It is not 4 steps you complete and tick off, and anybody selling you that is selling you endless recipes. It is 4 things that happen, roughly in that order, mostly outside your control. What you get to do is recognize which one you are standing in and stop fighting it. The blackening. The nigredo comes first, and it is the stage I have already described. Jung says of one alchemical author that he must have been undergoing the nigredo, the first stage of the work, which was felt as melancholia in alchemy, and corresponds to the encounter with the shadow in psychology. In your life, it is the week the number stops working and the practice goes flat. And the thing to understand is that this is not the practice failing. This is the first stage of the practice succeeding. What you do here is not clever. You open the drawer, you take out every item filed under when I have the money, and you write them down in plain language with no figures next to them. Then you go down the list and ask, honestly, which of these actually needs money? Most people find that about 1/3 of it does. The rest was never a budget problem. That discovery is the blackening, and it is supposed to be unpleasant. The whitening. Then comes the albedo, and the alchemists were specific about what causes it. The washing. Ablutio. Baptisma. Jung calls it the silver or moon condition, and he says one thing about it worth holding on to. The albedo is, so to speak, the daybreak, but not till the rubedo is it sunrise. Daybreak, not sunrise. The light is grey and there is no heat in it yet. What gets washed is the list. You go through it one item at a time and separate the things that are actually yours from the things you were handed. The test is brutal. For each one, ask, if nobody ever found out I had it, would I still want it? Some of the list will not survive that question. That is the washing. It is called the whitening because what is left is smaller and much cleaner than what you started with. The yellowing. Then the 3rd stage, and I want to stop here, because something happened to this one. Jung notes that around the 15th or 16th century, the colours were reduced from 4 to 3, and the xanthosis, otherwise called the citrinitas, gradually fell into disuse or was but seldom mentioned. The yellowing was quietly deleted from the sequence, and I do not think that is an accident because the citrinitas is the least glamorous stage there is. It sits between the clean insight and the finished life, and it is where the work is boring. It is Thursday. This is the stage where you take the smallest surviving item on the wash list and do it this week, badly, at small scale, without telling anybody. Not the version with the funding, the version that fits in an afternoon. Everybody skips this. The alchemists skipped it so thoroughly that they took it out of the sequence. and it is the only stage that has ever moved anyone anywhere. The reddening, and then the rubedo, which Jung describes as following from raising the heat of the fire to its highest intensity. Psychologically, he says, it denotes an increase of warmth and light coming from the sun, consciousness, the increasing participation of consciousness, which in plain language means you show up, fully, at cost, in public, with other people, where it can go wrong. The red and the white, he says, are king and queen who may celebrate their chemical wedding at this stage. The inner thing and the outer thing stop being two things. And notice what the goal of the whole opus turns out to be. It is not a quantity. In 1600 years of this literature, nobody once describes the finished work as an amount. There is one more thing, and it is the sharpest thing Jung ever said about people like us. He describes the alchemist's workroom as divided into two: a laboratory, where he bustles about with crucibles and alembics, and an oratory where he prays to God for the much-needed illumination. 2 rooms, both required. An old treatise he quotes puts it bluntly: ours require it totum hominem. The art requires the whole man. And then, at the very end of his work on alchemy, Jung delivers the verdict. Alchemy lost its vital substance, he writes, when some of the alchemists abandoned the laboratorium for the oratorium, there to befuddle themselves with an ever more nebulous mysticism. Read that again with your morning practice in mind. You have an oratory. It is beautiful. It has a candle and an app, and 15 minutes of carefully generated feeling. You have not been in the laboratory in years. And then, only then, the instruction: an alchemist called Maurianus, writing to a king who wanted gold, told him this: take that which is trodden under foot in the dunghill, for if thou dost not, thou wilt fall on thine head when thou wouldst climb without steps. Climbing without steps. That is your practice, described 1,000 years before you started it. 15 minutes every morning of trying to arrive somewhere without crossing the ground in between. At the end of his last great book, Jung says where it is actually found. Not this time in the cheap and unseemly substance which, rejected by everyone, could be picked up anywhere in the street, but in the distressing darkness of the human psyche. The same address. It has only moved indoors. And then the oldest line of them all, Maurianus again, to the same king who had asked where on earth you get the material. For this thing is extracted from thee, and thou art its ore. Thou art its ore. Not the goldsmith, not the buyer, the ore. The rough, unrefined, unpromising rock that the gold has to be got out of, at cost, with heat. So here is where to start, and it is far smaller than you want it to be. Stop asking for the number this week. Ask Watts's question instead, and refuse to answer it in the abstract. Not, what would I do with my life if money were no object? What would I do on Thursday? Whatever comes back will be small and specific and slightly embarrassing, and it will cost almost nothing, and you will want to throw it away immediately because it is not the life. It is only Thursday. Do not throw it away. That is the prima materia, cheap as dirt, available everywhere, despised by everyone, including you. Without it, the work cannot even be begun. Now, the boy on the stairs. He's still there. He has been standing there the whole time you have been listening, in his socks, on the top step, in the dark, waiting to find out from the sound of somebody else's voice what kind of night it is going to be. You are not going to get him off that step by getting the number. Getting the number only teaches him he was right. The only thing that has ever moved him is you, going down, in the dark, before you know what the envelope says, turning the light on in the kitchen, and making something. That is wealth. Everything else is inches.